So additionally, when it comes to writing about England, I have never been able to do this thing that they call write about what you know or write about where you are. There's so many people who do that magnificently. Unfortunately, I have never been one. When I did set my young adult novels on Whidbey Island, that was really the first time that I set novels in a place where I was living. I no longer live there. I live in Seattle now. But for those years that I lived in Whidbey Island and wrote those novels on Whidbey Island, what I found is that it was the place itself that inspired so much of what I wanted to write about and what was going to happen in the novels. England does that same thing for me. But Southern California, where I lived for a great deal of my career, did none of those things for me. I have never been able to write anything larger than a short story about Southern California, and I admire people who can, take a community and really bring that community to life. But it just was something that didn't strike at me, that didn't um, inspire me in any way. So the idea of write what you know. Well, first of all, when I started writing, I had never been told that by anybody, which was nice because I probably would have tried to write what I know. But aside from Southern California, the only thing I knew was how to be a high school English teacher. And I would have had a very short career writing crime novels if that was the setting, unless I was going to be killing off every member of the faculty and many, many of the students. And, even that would get pretty boring after a while. So I just took a dive and decided, what the heck, I'm going to write about England. Never even dawned on me that this might prove to be difficult. Never dawned on me that there were certain challenges, the unforeseen challenges. I mean, when I began, I basically sort of adhered to what I heard Colin Dexter say. Colin Dexter is the man who wrote the Inspector Morse novels, and I was on a panel with him one time, and he said, I've learned that if you're going to write these kinds of novels, it's best to know as little about police work as possible. And I thought that was so funny and so charming. But the reality is, he was really right, especially since police work becomes more and more advanced and more reliant upon various computer programs, various ways of monitoring people, and various forms of forensic science, especially regarding DNA. So in a way, it's become progressively, sort of simultaneously easier and more difficult to write a crime novel. So anyway, that is basically why I write British novels. The next question I'm asked probably is the second most frequent question, and that is, why did I kill off one of my main characters? Um, this was a kind of a controversial thing to do, and it's something that people were really upset about, and I was totally unprepared for how upset people were going to be. But I did hear from many people, and frequently there are irate members of audiences who want to know why I did such a heinous thing. But when I explain why, generally everybody has this moment where they pause and think, and then say, oh yeah, that makes sense. So I will explain it in this way. When a writer chooses to do a series, the writer has to start by making a decision, and in that, what is going to constitute the series? Is this going to be a series that only has one place in it, and the characters change, but the setting always remains the same? Or is the writer going to have continuing characters in it? Now, if the writer makes the decision to have continuing characters, which is what I did, then the next question is, does the writer want to freeze these characters in time, place, and circumstance, or move forward in time, place, and circumstance? Well, as a reader, first of all, I've always enjoyed series. And secondly, I've always enjoyed continuing characters. But the one thing I haven't liked is series that use continuing characters that are frozen in time, place, circumstance. So essentially, nothing about their lives ever changes. A good example is Miss Marple. Another good example is Hercule Poirot. Basically, Miss Marple is from, this little old lady from St. Mary Mead, the most dangerous village in England. And Hercule Poirot is a retired detective from Belgium who likes hot chocolate and wears patent leather shoes. And more than that, we don't really necessarily learn about those characters. So I was never compelled to read all of Agatha Christie's novels, and I certainly might have if there was more going on with those characters. But I prefer, oh, sorry, let me turn my phone off. That's rude. Um, but I have always preferred to see characters grow, change, and develop in a novel. And that was what I decided that I wanted to do. So in other words, I was going to have continuing characters and a slew of main continuing characters, a slew of secondary continuing characters, but these people were going to grow, change, develop through time, through place, through circumstance. So that was fine. The tricky bit has been that time has gone much faster than they actually have, which is something that you also have to do, because if you're going to have a career writing books and your characters are going to stay the same age as you are, then easily could have a detective inspector in his 70s who's still out, doing his detective work. So I knew that I didn't want to move them fast through time, but I did want to move them through circumstance and sometimes through place as well. But what that does is that puts you in a situation where you have one of two choices. You can have obligatory scenes and with these same characters in it, or you can have scenes without those characters in it, knowing that, and maybe they won't even be in the novel, and that set of continuing characters will be in the next novel. So I decided that I was going to have no obligatory scenes, no obligatory characters. So there would never be a thing where my editor would say to me, "Oh, wait, you haven't had Auntie June in the book this time. Your readers are going to miss Auntie June." What I wanted to do is from the beginning show my readers that the same characters, this set, excuse me, all of the characters from this set will not be in every single book. So having made that decision, then I began to write the books, allowing their lives to grow, change, and develop. When you do that, though, what you have to do is you have to keep opening the characters' stories up. You can't close them down no matter how much you feel compelled to do so. So when I think about my character, Thomas Lynley, I could see that Thomas Lynley's story was starting to close down. It was closing down because the main challenge that he was facing in his life, aside from his relationship with his mother and his brother, and those are very shaky relationships that he has with them, but his main relationship was the one that came from his love life. And I could see that his story was going to start ending if I did not do something to change his story. So when you need to open a character's story up, you do it in one of two ways, or there are probably more, but I'll give you the two examples that I was thinking of. You can open his story up by adding a new character, or you can open his story up by eliminating a character. My decision was to open his story up by eliminating a character. The reason I made that decision is that here he was married, he had resolved all of the problems, the considerations, the worries that he had in his relationship with his wife. She was pregnant. Now, there's a reason why there are no famous babies in literature, because babies make very boring literature unless the child is kidnapped or suffers from some fatal disease, and they can carry through a few books. But otherwise, babies are nice, but they are generally not made characters in literature. So if she was going to have this baby, then there were all those one or two choices to open the story up. The baby has to be kidnapped or develop some disease, get hit by a car, whatever, but something has to happen. Or Lynley has to, decide that he doesn't really want to be a father, divorce his wife, have child support, et cetera, et cetera. She divorces, whatever. I decided that, the best thing to really explode is the death of that character, and that was the death of Thomas Lynley's wife. I did it the way I did it because that's the kind of thing that happens in life. Certainly, we know that now, especially in the past couple of years in the United States and years before that, is that people are arbitrarily shot all the time. In the case of in the case of London, that doesn't happen very often. So, but it does happen. And so I decided that that would be what I would do. As quite a surprise to the reader, to Lynley, to the rest of the characters. I would eliminate Lynley's wife, which would then open the story up again, give Lynley something that he has to deal with. It allows me to examine how his life moves forward, how the death of Helen has also affected other characters in the book. So basically, that's why I did it. It really helped the series to stay afloat. So the next question I'm asked a lot is, well, okay, so you write these British novels, you have these continuing characters, but why did you choose crime and not something else? For example, the Poldark books by Winston Graham have the same characters pretty much throughout the books. They also change in time, place, and circumstances. Characters come, characters go, characters die. So why didn't you do something like that? Like a great big saga series of books, the way those are saga books. And that has a lot to do with the fact that, first of all, I have to admit that crime has always fascinated me. Ever since I was a child, I used to read either the crime stories in the newspaper. I can remember as a child reading about the death of Dr. Sam Shepard's wife. And I remember, and I was really young, but we got Life magazine, and Life magazine did a big story on it. And I remember reading the story and seeing the footprints and this and that and the other thing, and thinking and being really intrigued by that. And that has been the case my entire life. I have always been intrigued by what it is that drives people to take the life of another human being, because there's usually something behind that more than just, I feel like killing you. So that was one reason I decided to do crime. I also had taught a class when I was still teaching at El Toro High School in Southern California. I had taught a class called The Mystery Story, and it utilized novels. And one of the things that I began to see as I taught the class was that there was actually a method to writing these books. And there were certain things that needed to go into it, certain things that I could use as devices, certain things that I found interesting that I could pursue. So I then decided that, well, one of the things that would really appealed to me was that in a crime novel there's a distinct through line, and the through line is what drags the writer and the reader through the entire novel. In a crime novel, the through line is always there. It is essentially who killed the person who's been killed, or who committed the crime that's been committed, whether it is a murder, whether it is a kidnapping, whether it is a bank robbery, whatever. There's a crime, there will be a solution to the crime by the end of the novel. And that always gives me a place that I'm working toward, a way that I'm working forward, moving forward, excuse me. Now, the nice thing about that, and so I call the through line, the killer, the victim, the motive, and the means. I call that the skeleton. And on that skeleton, I learned very quickly that I can hang as much as I want. I can hang an exploration of a particular theme. I can have characters with a lot of depth. I can have subplots that mirror the main theme and sort of reinforce the theme. I can deal with particular issues like the Anglo-Pakistani community in Great Britain, and arranged marriages, and the tabloid culture. I have all of those things are interesting to me, and they can also fuel stories as well. So that is, although I could have written about something else, um, I was happiest doing that because it's sort of like a puzzle that you have to put. You're really kind of putting it together and then taking it apart at the same time in order to reach the conclusion of the novel. Or probably it's better to say you take it apart and then you put it back together. Anyway, so the next question that I get deals with a book called What Came Before He Shot Her. And I've had a number of people ask, tell me right up front, I couldn't read What Came Before He Shot Her. Now, if you don't know what that book is, that is the book that follows a book called With No One as Witness. And that is the book in which Thomas Lynley's wife is murdered. Obviously, What Came Before He Shot Her sort of tells you what that book is going to be about, and that is going to be the circumstances and the events that lead up to Lynley's wife being shot on the street where she lives, on the steps of her home, looking in her purse for her house key, and she just gets blown away. The initial thought that I wanted the reader to have and that I wanted Lynley to have is that because this is in the midst of a serial killing, that somehow the serial killer has discovered where he lives because it's already been in the paper who's investigating the crimes. So the serial killer finds out where he lives and takes out his wife, kills his wife. Of course, that isn't what happened at all. And so what came before he shot her tells the reader what actually did happen. And so what I say to people is, if you don't, obviously you don't have to read that book, but if you don't read that book, you will never know what really happened, because what Lynley and the police think happened is not what happened. And what came before he shot her shows you what happened that day, but it also shows you how circumstances in the life of a 12-year-old boy put him on the street on that day. So that's why I say to people, I think you'll be surprised. And I think that, and then some people, they can't finish it because when they're reading it, they discover they like the 12-year-old boy so much they can't stand to finish the book. And that's really for me, is a great compliment, because I always set out to do something in my novels. And in this particular novel, what I set out to do was to create a boy who is the person who confesses to the crime in the previous book, and that I would create a kid who makes all the wrong decisions for all the right reasons, and the reader will have great compassion for this child because of that. And so when people didn't finish it because they didn't want to have to face what was going to happen to not only to Lynley's wife but to Joel, I realized, great, so I was successful. I'm sorry that they didn't read it, but I was successful if they cared that much about somebody that I created on paper. And then my the final thing that I'll deal with is a question that I get about research. And the question I get is, how do you do research for the kinds of novels that I write? And if you're going to do research, where do you know when to stop? So I'll answer the second part first, because I read an article or an interview one time by the British playwright Tom Stoppard. And if you're familiar with his plays, they are just amazing in their depth of knowledge of particular subjects. So I think in particular of his wonderful play Arcadia, which has so much to do with mathematics. And so somebody asked him, how do you know all this stuff? And he said, he said, I learn just as much as I need to write the play, and then I forget it. And so that is pretty much what goes on in my writing. I learn as much as I need to learn to write the book, and then I forget about it. So an example in my book, Playing for the Ashes, well, that's a term from British cricket, British Australian cricket. And as soon as I heard it used one time at a dinner party, I thought, oh my God, that's a great title for a book. But that means that the book has to have cricket in it, because anybody who knows English/Australian cricket will recognize that as a cricket expression. So in order to write that book, I learned a heck of a lot about cricket, and I went to cricket matches, and I went to the Oval, I went to Lord's Cricket Grounds, took tours, things like that, and then I wrote the novel, and then pretty much forgot everything about cricket, except that yeah, I did happen to see part of a cricket game. It was in a production of the book A Suitable Boy, and they were playing cricket in it. And I recognized, when the guy was defending the wicket and hit the ball for a six, I knew what that meant. So I hadn't forgotten everything. So how do I do this research? Basically, I am doing it. I'm trying to think of it 3 or 4 different ways. First of all, the location research I do actually on location. I choose a spot in England and I read about that spot in advance. You can do that on the internet now, but in the early days, there was nothing digital whatsoever, except you could you could type on a computer, but there was no resource. So initially, I would choose a particular place in England that I wanted to go to that place, and buy books about that place, come home, read the books, find within the books places I wanted to see, and then go back and see those places. So and that was, a long process, but it was a process that filled me with lots of ideas. What I uh, what I do now is read about the place in advance. It's really not that much different. I read about the place in advance, and you can do a lot of that online. But then I still choose the places I need to go see, and go see those places when I get there. The reason I don't depend on just like looking at the internet is that there's a limit to what you can learn from the internet. Although I do know a writer who's written about two thrillers. One takes place in Colorado, one takes place in the San Francisco Bay Area. He's never been to either of them. He's British, and it's amazing how he does place. Because he does place, and he's right on the money, and I don't know how he does it. But I like to actually go to these places because there's certain things that you would not know unless you were there. For example, there's a place in London where my next book takes place, and it's called Hackney City Farm. And when I read about it in my preliminary research, I thought, oh, that sounds like an interesting place to go see. So I went to Hackney City Farm, and the first thing I noticed was the just absolutely overpowering stench from this farm, which is right in the middle of Hackney. But it's a place where people can bring their children. It's like a petting zoo, but like a real dirty petting zoo, because it's a real working sort of farm, and so the kids can see the sheep, they can see the cows, they can see the ducks, whatever. But unless you were there, you would never think about how overpowering the smell is. So that's the kind of thing that only being there would allow you to see. And also in the book is a place called Ridley Road Market, and I'd read about that in advance, and so I went there, and the vast amount of things of African origin that are sold in that market, I wouldn't have known about unless I had gone there. Because whereas I could see pictures of the market and I might be able to see the stalls, although if you look on Google Earth and you look at Ridley Road Market, you would never even know there was a market there, because when they took the pictures for Google Earth, none of the stalls were set up. So you can't really depend on that. But when I went there and was able to wander around and see exactly what they were selling there, the vast amount of things that were foreign, and also the noise, and hear the music playing, and then also see all the different places where you could have your hair braided and get all kinds of different African-oriented hairstyles. And I wouldn't have known any of that unless I had actually gone to that place. So what I'm trying to do is I am trying to see as many places as I can, because I am looking for places that suggest story to me. And in doing that, I often am able to develop elements of the plot that I didn't know were going to be there. Or when I go home and start looking at my notes and my photographs, then I also see things that inspire me to add to the plot. And, of course, not being able to go to England during these last, well over a year now, since my last trip to England, it has just sort of reinforced for me the necessity of actually going to the place to be able to give it the level of verisimilitude that I want to give it. So anyway, those are really the 5 questions that I was going to answer for myself and for you guys. And if you have anything that you would like to ask, now's the time to do that. Okay. I'm happy to answer anything.
The first question is about your YA series, The Edge of. Are you thinking about writing another YA book or series, and what inspired you to go into young adult fiction?
Okay, the first part of the question is, I'm assuming that sort of the question has to do with the fact that the 4th YA novel sort of ends on a cliffhanger, and am I going to complete that? And yes, I very much want that to be my next book once I am done with the work on my current novel, and I'm doing editorial revisions on my current novel now. So I'm hoping that would be my next novel. The second is that the question was, why did I do that in the first place? Is that the second question, Michael? I think it is.
It's actually what inspired you to write in the
okay.
genre.
Okay. Well, you know what it was? This is going to sound really funny. I have. All right. So I had been getting this is so frivolous. I've been getting my nails done by this woman on Whidbey Island, where I lived at the time. And she and her mother were super, super fans of vampires. And they were absolutely disgusted with the books that are set in Forks, the Twilight books. Now, they weren't disgusted with them because they had been to Forks themselves. They were disgusted with them because, as they put it, vampires do not act that way. And quite without irony, they said that. And I thought, oh, that's interesting. So I decided I would read one of the vampire books, and I read the first one, Twilight. Now, in the spirit of true confession, I have seen all of the Twilight movies. I find them delightful / hilarious, but probably for all the wrong reasons. However, they are. I didn't miss one of them, because once I saw the first one, I thought, oh my God, I've got to see the rest of these. So I never watched them in a movie theater because I did not want to insult the true fans by giggling things. So I always waited until I could see them in the privacy of my home. But they've given us, me and my husband, a great deal of amusement. Anyway, when I saw those books and realized how they had put Forks on the map, and believe me, if you've been to Forks, no offense to anybody who might be from Forks, but Forks is not a place that you really want to go. In that, basically, there's nothing there except that Stephanie Myers did put it on the map, and they made it famous. But I thought, oh, wouldn't it be cool if I could write some Woodby Island book and make Woodby Island sort of like Prince Edward Island in Anne of Green Gables books, and people would go there because they wanted to see the location. So that was my initial idea. So I wanted to do that, and then I decided to do young adult because I hadn't done young adult, and I wanted to see, it was one of those really stupid, how hard can it be? Well, it was really difficult because I'm not by nature a young adult writer. It's not that I can't write about young adults because I've had young adults in my books, like from the very beginning. But to have them as the driving force in the novel, that was much more challenging for me. However, having done the 4 books, I really would like to finish off this series because I know how the series ends, but I've just been caught up doing other things, and that's why I haven't finished it. But I certainly intend to. Any other questions?
So Joe is giddy with the opportunity to meet you, and she really appreciates the conversation, but she says she winces when she reads her writing and gives up. Any advice for getting past that?
Oh, um, yeah, that's too bad. I always tell people to, sort of to ignore the committee, because the committee are all the voices in your head that are telling you that what you're writing is no good, give it up, you're not a writer, et cetera, et cetera. And the committee comprises everyone in your life who's always had a negative thing to say about you, be it your grammar school teachers, your, parish priest, or whatever, your parents, your old aunt, whoever, your best friend, whoever has said a negative thing. Well, they reside in your head, and those are the voices. And so I always tell people, to dismiss the voices in your head. Easier said than done, obviously. Um, the, the additional thing, though, is that when you're writing, you really have to trust your body, not your mind. And that's also where the voices are. The way I put it to my students is that your mind will lie to you all the time because of the voices in your head. Your body will never lie to you. And if you think about it, if you have a feeling of dread, that's your body. It's not necessary. It's not your mind. If you're afraid, your body's telling you you're afraid. It's the same that applies to writing. When I know I'm heading down the wrong path, I trust my body because my body has this sinking feeling as I'm working. And that tells me, okay, I've gone wrong here somewhere. So I trust that. But I would never listen to what my mind was telling me when it came to the artistic nature of my writing. I would never listen to my mind, and that's what you just must not do. You have to trust your body. It's how it feels, not so much what it reads like. So I would check first of all to see if that's what's going on. Is it the committee? Is it my head? I mean, I had one student who was just a wonderful writer, but there was no way she could finish a novel. She was really, it didn't matter how much we told her that her writing was brilliant. The issue was that her mother had been such a negative influence in her life that she couldn't get past that. And I had a very controlling mother who had a pretty negative influence on my life, but she, bless her heart, never intruded into my writing, ever. My mother never read anything I wrote till I was published. And that was actually, she could, maybe she wasn't interested, but also it was a real gift. It allowed me to just write whatever I wanted to write. So if my first efforts at books were really bad. I can see that now, and I probably could see that then. But the main thing is to move forward, because if you move forward, you will only get better. Oh, and always read up. Don't read across. Don't read down. So what does that mean? Read books by people you know are better than you as writers, and there is so much to writing that is merely a process of osmosis. The more you expose yourself to good writing, the better your own writing will get. And I know that from having been a high school teacher as well.
So, having developed primary and secondary characters over a period of time, has it come to a point that a character ever does anything that surprises you?
Well, it's sort of an odd thing. My characters don't do anything out of character, but they may do something to surprise me. But what they do will still be in character. An example would be one of my favorite moments from actually it's from With No One as Witness, the book where Lynley's wife dies. And so in this particular scene in the book, Lynley and Havers are interviewing this young man that has some information to give to them, and this is his only scene in the entire novel. And I'll explain the importance of that in a moment. But he will only speak to them, whereas they have to meet him in Southwark Cathedral. And he doesn't want to meet with them any other place. And then when they get there, he says he'll only talk to them if he can have a nosh, which means, have to get something to eat. So they go to this cafe, and it's such a greasy spoon place. Lynley won't even touch the menu. So this kid proceeds to order like four separate meals. And ultimately, when I think he's in the middle of the second of his meals when he gets really, and it's pasta. And so in the second of his meals, when he gets really angry at their questioning, he just stomps out of this little cafe. So Lynley and Havers are sitting there discussing what the kid has said. And as they're sitting there, Havers is just picks up the fork and just is playing with the fork in the plate of spaghetti and the plate of pasta, and she's just playing with it. What I mean by that is she's just fingering it, like twirling the pastas or whatever. And finally, at the end of the scene, Lynley says to her, Havers, what are you going to do with that pasta? And so she looks at it, she pops it in her mouth, eats it, and says, they need to work on their al dente. Now, the thing is, do characters surprise me? Absolutely. I had no idea she was going to do that. I had no idea, what the kid was going to actually do. I knew the information he had to give, but I didn't know what he was going to actually do inside this cafe. But what happened is that his stomping off left this open door, and Barbara Havers just walked right through it. Now, for her to do that is totally in character. First of all, I mean, it's exactly the kind of thing she would do. And secondly, she knows what will just absolutely drive Lynley crazy. And so she knew that if she tasted this pasta, he would just go, oh my God. And so that's what I mean when I say she's in character, but what she did was a surprise to me. It wasn't planned.
So, when you're not writing, which it sounds like you always are, what are you reading?
I'm always reading too. So I read all kinds of different things. I would say that there is not one particular genre that I'm reading. There is not particular. I'm not particular. It has to be fiction or nonfiction. So, for example, like what I finished this morning. And when I finish a book, I have to start another book. I don't want to ever be without a book. So this morning I finished a book called Lab Girl, which is this wonderful memoir written by a geobotanist, and it was fascinating. It's not overly long. It's beautifully written because it's a combination of her life and the science of geobotany, which I knew nothing about, and it is absolutely fascinating. But the stuff about her life is equally wonderful to read, and so that was what I was reading until like halfway through my exercise cycle this morning, when I then picked up a book by Lisa Scottolini, sorry, which is a book that is set in Italy, and I just started it, and it's I'm really enjoying it. So it's really pretty eclectic. I mean, before that, I read a book about an amazing book called I can't remember. It was about the rescue of the boys in the cave in Thailand. I don't know if you remember, these young boys were, and they'd gone for a hike with their soccer coach into this cave, did not realize how close, well, it wasn't monsoon, did not realize that monsoon season was going to arrive while they were in the cave, which is what happened. And then they were trapped in the cave. And this was about the rescue to get those boys out of the cave. And it was amazing. It was really fascinating. So I really like good nonfiction. I really like good memoirs. I read lots and lots of fiction of various types. People are always recommending books, and when I get a recommendation, I generally go out and buy the book. So I'm doing the Lisa Scottoline book right now, and I'm sorry that I can't remember the title. And then up on deck is a book called Hamnet that was recommended to me by a friend.